Senator Mike Lee is joining us from the Senate offices today in the Russel Rotunda. Thanks so much for being here. A busy day and a busy time of year.
Yes, it is. Today we held our first hearing after I assumed the chairmanship of the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee, and we held our hearing on Wright, who's been nominated to serve as the Secretary of Energy. Tomorrow we're going to be holding another hearing, this time for Governor Bergham, who's been nominated to serve as the Secretary of the Interior. That's a department, of course, very important to our state, given that the federal government owns about 2/3 of Utah, and most of that land is managed by the Department of the Interior.
Anything that came up today that you were interested in, hadn't really thought of before, or did everything go as planned?
Look, everything went really smoothly today. Wright fielded questions from my colleagues on the committee for hours and fielded questions on a really wide range of topics from people representing almost every viewpoint along the ideological spectrum in both the Republican and the Democratic parties, and people in different parts of the country. And he handled it like a champ. I never once saw anybody get under his skin. This is somebody who breathes, eats, sleeps and dreams about energy, and he's exactly the kind of person we need running that department. He understands that Americans face a pressing need for more energy, including more electric power, for the simple reason that we're growing as a country and our demands for electric power are growing every single day. We've got to make sure we have access to clean, safe, affordable sources of energy.
Also today, Marco Rubio and Pam Bondi were in the hot seats today. I saw that you had a moment with Pam Bondi. You were talking to her a little bit about the weaponization of the Justice Department. Were you satisfied with her answers?
Yes, her answers were terrific. Pam Bondi also has proven to be just a consummate professional. She handled a lot of questions, including some that were friendly, some that were a little hostile, and yet she did a really good job of responding to every one of them. So I happen to serve on both of those committees, both the Judiciary Committee and on the Foreign Relations Committee. I also questioned Marco Rubio, my longtime friend and colleague, who's been nominated to serve as the Secretary of State. With Pam Bondi, I talked to her about criminal justice reform, about the First Step Act implementation, what we need out of that and what we need to do next as part of the Second Step Act, and what else we need to do to facilitate criminal justice reform. I also raised with Pam Bondi the need to be conscious of things like warrantless surveillance under Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. I was very pleased by her answers. She acknowledged to me in response to my questions that there's not an exception to the warrant requirement that kicks in just whenever the government doesn't feel like taking the time to get a warrant, nor is there an exception across the board just for anything touching on national security. The American people deserve to be secure in their homes, their papers, their persons, and in their phone calls. And without a warrant and without probable cause, the U.S. government has no business spying on them.
One of the hearings that's gotten the most attention so far yesterday, Pete Hegseth. There were a couple of people going into this, even Republican senators, where there were some question marks of whether they'd be a yes or no vote. Joni Ernst seemed to be one of those, but yesterday after the question, it seemed like she was more in line with her, and today saying that she'd vote in favor. What are you hearing from your colleagues about whether or not he'll make it through, or some of these others who are going through their hearings, whether or not it'll be smooth sailing?
Look, Pete Hegseth is going to be confirmed. The question is just how many votes he gets, but he will have a majority of the votes. I hope and I expect that he'll have most or all Republican senators, and I would like to believe he'd get some Democrats as well. Look, you can't perform as well as he did for as many hours as he did yesterday with as much hostile questioning as he faced without picking up some votes, and he did that. Time will tell, but I believe we desperately need Pete Hegseth as our next Secretary of Defense. This is a man who has served his country. He's a man who has a vision for returning the Department of Defense to a position of greatness, to returning the Department of Defense to being a lethal fighting force that will serve Americans throughout the world, ideally through the deterrent effect that it establishes once people around the world see its lethality.
I'm seeing from my end here, and I'm definitely not seeing the schedules you are, that there's possibly some of those picks that might be delayed with Kristi Noem, Doug Bergham, Tulsi Gabbard. Do you know why the committees are putting off those hearings? Are there any problems or catch-ups that are happening?
Yeah, so in the case of Doug Bergham, his hearing was originally scheduled for Tuesday. We put it off until tomorrow because we received paperwork late from the Office of Government Ethics, whose job it is to review all the materials that these nominees submit and perform some ministerial tasks after reviewing their paperwork to certify that everything is in order. I believe we waited a week or 10 days after he submitted his paperwork before we finally got the certification. We've got that now. We'll be proceeding. As to the other nominees, I'm not sure where their paperwork stands, but I'm encouraging my colleagues who, like me, serve as committee chairs to go ahead and notice up their hearings. Most committees require a 7-day advance notice before holding the hearing, but they've got to make sure they have all the paperwork before the hearing is actually held. We've got that paperwork now with Doug Bergham. We're going to proceed with his hearing tomorrow.
There was some talk maybe a month or so ago when President Trump was putting out some of his nominations that possibly some of these committees would slow roll them or make it difficult to vote on them. Are you seeing any of that happening, or was that all just talk and bluster?
Well, look, there's no question that the party not in power, the party that's about to lose power, namely the Democrats, don't necessarily have a real keen interest across the board in accelerating the confirmation of President Trump's cabinet personnel. Nonetheless, it's our job to make sure that that happens, and we're going to do that. And fortunately, in some of these cases, I think we're going to see Democratic cooperation. But we have to assume that in many instances, the Democrats will want to delay it as possible. After all, it's their holdover personnel and their deep state personnel who will be more loyal to their mission, their objective, the longer we can keep these top-level spots vacant. But that's why it's all the more incumbent upon us as Republican senators to make sure that they get through and get through quickly, get them confirmed in a timely fashion. Because otherwise, the failed policies of the Biden administration, the failed policies that the Americans resoundingly rejected in November, will still be in place for a time.
Inauguration Day is just 5 days away. In the meantime, President Biden seems to be getting a lot of work done in these last couple of weeks, even the last month of his presidency. A lot of the things he's doing seem to be doorstops to some of the doors that it seemed that soon-to-be President Trump was hoping to open or make some changes from. Do you believe that some of these are going to be difficult to undo for President Trump and Republicans, or are they something that can be changed quickly as soon as there's someone else in power?
Look, there's a wide range of actions. Some of them can't be undone at all. Pardons, for example, aren't undone. Others, like changes in internal White House policy, can be changed fairly quickly. Others still, like regulatory pronouncements that have formally taken effect following a lengthy notice and comment period. Those can be taken down, but they take some time. In some cases, they might take resolution of disapproval passed by both houses of Congress, presented to President Trump for his signature, undoing a Biden-era regulation. So it depends on the policy in question. But there's no doubt, Heidi, and when you look back over the last 4 years, you look at the amount of damage that has been done, the norm-busting, flagrant abuses of government power, the expansion of government power in a way that has made the American people, and Utahns in particular, less free to make their own choices and less able to afford their way of life. These things do require urgent action, and I think we will see action with all deliberate speed by the new administration.
Speaking of President-elect Trump, he promised that there would be a ceasefire deal before he was actually in office. Today, breaking news that Hamas and Israel have come to an agreement here for a ceasefire deal. Was President Trump, from what you're hearing, a big part of these negotiations? Was the White House in it, or is this a team effort?
Look, I believe wholeheartedly that President Trump is the without which not cause of this agreement happening. Now, it's a shame that it had to take this long. This should have been done months ago. But with President Trump coming into office and vocally speaking out against Hamas, with President Trump announcing to the world that he's not going to tolerate the Hamas violence, I think that accelerated them, pushed them to make these decisions on an accelerated basis. This development is great news in many respects. It's not all sunshine and lollipops, though. I mean, there are still a lot of problems that remain, hostages that remain in custody or unaccounted for, and there are some Hamas terrorists who may end up being released as a result of this. But grateful nonetheless that some progress has been made, and I think that progress is attributable to President Trump and those who elected him, sending the signal to the world that a new sheriff is about to be in town.
Another headline I wanted to get your take on earlier this week, the Supreme Court denying a case filed by the state of Utah and Governor Cox, hoping to get some more control over the federal lands here in Utah. 70 to 80% of our lands are controlled by the federal government. Is this a case you'd like to see go and maybe build its way through the lower courts, or is this a dead and done deal?
No, Heidi, 100%. I hope, expect, and ask that this litigation now be filed in lower courts. This is a setback. It was unfortunate. It was I believe it was a big mistake by the Supreme Court not to take it, for a couple of reasons. First of all, the Supreme Court has started to treat this type of jurisdiction, its original jurisdiction, as if it were part of its discretionary docket. I believe that the statute, on its face, requires the court to take it. The court didn't see it that way. I know at least two justices, Justice Thomas and Justice Alito, my former boss, feel differently about that statute. I suspect there may be others as well. In any event, they should have taken the case. But it's important to remember, though, Heidi, this is not the end of the battle. This is just the end of the opening scene, because the state now could, and I believe should, and probably will, file this in a lower federal court, and hopefully that will make its way back ultimately to the Supreme Court for resolution.
Senator Mike Lee, thanks so much for joining us on what is a very busy week in Washington. We'll be watching on Inauguration Day. Thank you.
Thank you, Heidi.